Oh, here we are, Dr. Robert and me, JR, back again to talk about another one of your albums. And we're going to talk about the album, If Not Now, When? Because if we don't talk about that now, when will we, right?
Well, if not now, when? I mean, I think the problem with it is, that I've always had, is that it should never have been called that.
Yeah, you mentioned this before. Go on.
I sort of... I don't know how it happened, and I changed my mind at the last minute. It was always going to be called The Guessing Game or Lions of Charing Cross, and I thought The Guessing Game was probably more apt. And then I had the song If Not Now When, and I thought, and somebody said, oh, that's a great title. And then I went with it at the last minute, but it was a bad mistake. And I've done it a couple of times where I've changed the title of an album at the last minute, and I should always go with my first inkling. Because, of course, it is a very well-known book. Primo Levi wrote a book, If Not Now When. It's also a well-worn phrase, and I just thought, nah, it kind of it didn't. I shouldn't have gone with it. But anyway, it's too late now. But I just wanted to point that out at the very beginning of this little thing. That sometimes, you know, it's a lesson for me. Even when even in my latter years, I still sometimes ignore the first impulse, which is usually the correct one.
There is a big thing, isn't there? When you're a creative person, there's a big thing about, do you go with your gut or do you try and overthink things? And as soon as you get into the alleyway where you think, no, I need to think about this, already you've moved away from your gut instinct. And that's probably a fatal error right there, isn't it?
That's right. That's what I just said.
Fair enough. Right. I am going to, before we talk about the songs and before we talk about the record, because I've been on a bit of a journey with this week, but I'll come back to that. Okay. Because as you know, when we decide to do one of these things, there's a month, and I always listen to each one about 5 or 6 times. And I've had quite a weird sort of experience going through it, but we'll come back to that. Okay. Because the first thing I've got to ask is about how this album was sort of funded. Because this is your first crowd-funded album, isn't it?
Well, properly through Pledge, but I think we crowd-funded the first one when we got back together. Really, Devil's Tavern. It was largely done that way, but this was done through Pledge, which was the kind of the company and the app that was set up to enable bands like us to access their fans directly and give them all sorts of different experiences. And some people came to the studio. In fact, that's why Richard Clark came down to Mono Valley. Other people just bought the album, but that's how we raised the funds to go and do the album Mono Valley. Yeah, through
Was it always going to be that, or was there some point during the course of sort of writing it, getting it together, where you suddenly thought, no, we should do this? Or did somebody suggest it even?
I think it was always going to be that. The album before we'd done on Cherry Red, I think.
Yes.
Like New Morning. Feels like a New Morning. So I think this was, we were breaking out, and it was definitely time just to do it on our own label again. That seemed to me to make a lot more sense than going with any label. So that, you know, in a way, so we did it on Blood Monkey Music, which is what we did Devil's Tavern on, which is basically just us going through a digital distributor. I don't think we made vinyl of this one, but we had a bit of a budget because it's a great studio, Mono Valley. You know, I had been there to do the first Monks Road one by this point, I think, so I knew the place and thought, yeah, this would be great for us to go to.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and yes, one of the sort of, because the thing about, some people won't know, but the thing about these Pledge things is you have a sort of tiered system where people get different rewards for different things that they put in. And one of the things you did this time was sort of have people come down to the studio for sort of end of recording session, sort of concert sort of thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. We recorded a version, coming up for air at that little thing. We had a little concert in the live room. I mean, things like you could do a round of golf with Nev and I, which somebody did, and then there were drum lessons and things like that.
Bash did the golf thing, didn't he? Was it?
Yeah. Bash did the golf thing, and Charlotte and Brett, I think, did the drums. And, you know, how some hardcore fans came down and were there. And it was lovely. It was great. It was nice to involve everyone and bring them all into the live room and play what we'd done and all that. It was really nice.
And very intimate as well, I should imagine.
Yeah, but it's a great studio. I mean, Mono Valley is the sister studio to Rockfield.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Rockfield is like the famous one in Wales where Led Zeppelin recorded and all that. But Mono Valley used to be the rehearsal room for that. And there were brothers that had these two studios. And as all brothers do, they had a massive argument and split into two. So they didn't speak to each other, even though the two studios were in the same village. Mono Valley is also where, I mean, that's the Oasis album, the one that you see with them lying about on the front. That's in that live room. I don't know which album that's called, whatever it's called. So
help you with that.
It's a well-known and a brilliant. Unfortunately, it's gone now. They just couldn't keep it going. But it was a great old farmhouse with a big stone room, and it was perfect. It was one of the last of the great residentials.
Well, it sounds like you had a really nice time.
Yeah,
recording this.
We did. You know.
Right,
it's a bit of an unusual album. I think I demoed it all before we went. I had it all in demo, and it was a little bit of a new direction in terms of I wanted it more guitar based, more kind of almost boogie sort of like kind of going back to my roots a bit in terms of pop music and stuff like that, but
most of it is very definitely in that sort of glam rock. I say most of it, probably about half of it or so is kind of essentially glam rock or using the same sorts of rhythms as like T-Rex or whatever would use. And even the rest of it has got a very sort of 60s, 70s pop sort of feel, I think.
Oh.
Here's my journey though. This is the journey I went on because, like I say, I will always, and this is really just an excuse to listen to the records, really. I will listen to it about 5 or 6 times before we talk.
Okay.
And of course, I know all the records anyway. But this one was not one that I got when it came out because, I don't know, as you might be aware, after my little boy was born, I had about 4 or 5 years where I didn't really buy any music because of him being the age he was and of me being in the work I'm in and doing the shifts that I do. I just didn't get. I had about 4 or 5 years where the opportunity didn't come up. So this was one I had to catch up with afterwards.
Yeah.
And I've always really enjoyed this one because I think this is your most fun album. I think I'd probably categorize it at. But this week, or the last sort of couple of weeks, you try and listen with a bit more of a critical head and sort of think, right, what's this sort of artistic thing going on with this? And I gotta say, the first time I put it on, listening to it with that head, I was kind of like, this album's not quite, I wouldn't say not quite of a standard, but it doesn't have some of the depth that some of your other stuff has, I would have said. But then, like, second and third listen down, I'm like, well, who gives a fuck? It's just a lot of fun, this record. This is probably your most fun record. And actually, in the end, this is one of my favourites, I think. Despite the fact that I think maybe there's 2 or 3 songs that just kind of feel... There are 2 or 3 songs where I feel like they're not quite up to some of the stuff that you might... Because I think with a lot of your records, there's like the pop songs and there's kind of like the sort of deeper, more thoughtful songs. And there's less of the deeper, more thoughtful side here, I think. So this is a record where it feels like you're just having a good time until you get to maybe the last couple of songs and then it sort of goes to that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is that a fair point?
I think... I mean, I had to listen to it in preparation for this, one quick listen through, and I was struck by the fact that there are quite heavy lyrics in there.
Yeah, the lyrics are. I'm thinking more of the music, I think.
I think that All That Glitters, Shadowboxing, you know, there's some of the kind of more, some of the more honest, deeper lyrics that I've written, I think, because it's all part of a kind of a slow kind of process and awakening, maybe a sort of change. I think that the vehicle to try and do it in that kind of style of music didn't always suit the band. Suits me, but I'm not sure it suits everyone.
Yeah, so maybe that's what's coming through, yeah.
Although I thought I had a blinder when he got the baritone sax out and started playing along. And I think what it is like, it's not so much glam, it's rock and roll. I mean, it's rock and roll in the sense of like rock music, but with the roll. Like
Eddie Cochran and stuff like that as well, of course.
Yeah, and those things always swung. Like, I've never been a big rocker. I'm not a fan, particularly of rock music. I find it, staid and sort of conservative.
It's a bit metronomic, rock music.
It doesn't have the roll with it.
Yeah.
So the roll comes from the boogie. The roll comes, Lightning Hopkins. The difference between Lightning Hopkins and Eric Clapton, for instance, is although they can play the same song, it's a world of difference. And I veer towards that Lightning Hopkins. Not that I'm in that league, but I do have a natural swing to kind of my feel. And so even if it's just a rock and roll riff, it has to swing. It has the boogie. So and to try and do that now and make it sound fresh, the best. I just felt that there's not a lot of production on it, if you know what I mean. It's quite there like that, which again, is not what we're known for. I mean, Journey to You is far more valiant. I know that's the Blow Monkeys, big, like, jim jim jim.
Well, and even Devil's
Dance. We're working on a new one, which I don't think it's going to be nothing like that. So that's good, and that keeps it alive and fresh. And so that's what I wanted to do. It's a lot of the albums are a kind of semi-reaction to the one that came before. So that's what, in a sense, there's a bit of that. And I just wanted to I'd started to play a lot more electric guitar live and things, and I was just getting on that tip. But so yeah, that's where the kind of feel came. It wasn't a deliberate attempt to say, "Oh, let's go glam rock." It was more like rock and roll, that kind of the roots of that thing, and still trying to make that kind of relevant and make it work. And then, of course, one or two songs survive. Okay, Have It Your Way the way we play it now has turned into a kind of Northern Soul stomper, but in that it was more like a boogie thing. Yeah, there's one or two which are still kind of relevant for the set. I think the other one was The Sound of Your Laughter, which was kind of like, first, it sounds like a kind of Beach Boys-ish rock and roll thing. Yeah. But I really like the lyric to it, and I like the vibe to it.
That's true, actually. There's a feel here where you kind of got a big melting pot of all the good things that happened, sort of 60s and early 70s. And it's kind of got a really sort of sunny feel as well. But there's even a song "Sun Is in the Sky," right? Even the sort of slightly slower, more sort of, because there's always a moment where an album goes to a sort of slightly darker place generally. But even those things like "Think Again" and "Stay Now" still feel kind of quite sunny and up, really.
Yeah, well, kind of. "Stay Now" was obviously, I had recorded that with P.P. Arnold initially.
Oh yes, of course.
On 5 in the afternoon. And she sang it, brilliantly. But I thought it was a bit overlooked, that album. So I wanted to do that again because I like that song. And it's not a top 5 Blow Monkeys album, but it's got some things on it that would go in a compilation, because there's one or two on it that really stand out for me. So, and that's all you can hope for.
Yeah.
We were trying for something. Maybe we didn't quite get there sometimes, but there were some beautiful moments on it. And in the end, it's like one of those Neil Young albums that he's done so many that you think, I like that. It's not in the top, but it's okay. And when you're actually listening to it and you're in the process, I'm trying to do this dispassionately, not as the artist. It's like I listened to it this morning. I think Michelle came through and said, "Oh no, I forgot about this one. I really like this one."
Yeah.
Just like it. You don't need to analyze it. You don't need to go, "Oh, that's really clever. Those lyrics, those chords. Oh, that's lovely, isn't it?" You just let it wash over you as an experience, and it feels good. And that's the function of music.
I tell you, a perfect example of that is just now in the car on the way back from the school run. "Think Again" is on.
Yeah.
"Think Again" is fine. It's a great song, but
Yeah.
but Think Again is a certain type of a song,
Mm.
and you get to the end of Think Again, and it's taking you slightly out of that sort of happy mood, and then the guessing game starts up, and as soon as the guessing game starts up, I'm kind of wishing I was on a dance floor instead, or something like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like
guessing game is that could have been a sort of Slade B-side. It's got or The Sweet or something like. It could have been Chin and Chapman, that one.
yeah.
Could have been on Rack. The Think Again, the demo's better. In fact, I'm going to put the demo up. The demo's better.
Right.
The demo had more snap. It was more like a bit more like Beck or something. It was more out there.
Yeah, Think Again actually feels like one of your most sort of indie type things, I guess. It feels slightly out of sync with some of the rest of your stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it was quite successful on the record. Like I said, I think the demo for that one's better. But yeah, I mean, yeah, but guessing game is just came together. It's just one of those. It just falls in. It just works. In fact, I might even try and do it. I don't think Crispin's ever played it with us, but I think we might try that as well. It's a good fun one live,
Yeah, I bet it is.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask as well. This does sound. I mean, when you were doing gigs around the time of this album, presumably you had sort of, at least 5 or 6 of the songs in the set. Those must have been fun gigs to play.
I think we did. I think we might have done. We definitely had "Okay, Have It Your Way." We had Lines of Charing Cross as a sort of ending, and we had a few. Stay Now we used to do as an acoustic thing. Yeah, it's good fun to play. Obviously, this is Tony's last.
Yes.
So things changed a little bit after this.
Did you? Okay, I was going to come and ask this later, but as soon as you brought it up, let's ask it now. Did you know at the time you were recording it that it would be Tony's last, or is that something that happened afterwards?
I had a feeling, but he hadn't said. But I knew that. At the time, his wife was very ill. He also had other pressures, and he had this offer of something that was quite tasty in terms of money and stuff. And I think it was a bit of a struggle. And there were absolutely no hard feelings from anyone. And I've always said to him that no one ever really leaves this band. That you just take a little sabbatical,
Yeah.
a little holiday. So it was fine, it was all cool. And I had a suspicion, but it wasn't until afterwards, really. I think it was getting a bit too hard with everything that he had on his plate.
Yeah.
So that was the last of that particular, because Tony is a very, very solid drummer. We used to call him the silverback. If there was any trouble at any gig, he'd jump from behind the drums and sort it out. But he was totally, totally solid. And you bring in Crispin, and it's a different dynamic. Crispin's edgier, funky thing. That's his thing.
Right.
So I think that started to reflect in the way that kind of we went as well, because obviously all those I leave quite a lot to them. I don't sit and go, right, the hi-hats here, the snares there. This is what you do, the bass. There's no point in that. I will suggest if I don't like, but I like to kind of. That's the point in being in a band. So whoever's playing drums changes the character quite a lot of what we do. So that was part of the thing that we had with Tony.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Because whatever else you listen to on the record, I've always found that everything is informed by the drums, because despite the fact that you write from the guitar down, when you record, you don't necessarily do it in this order, but when you record, it feels to me like you build from the drums up, if you know what I mean. I think the drums has to be the foundation for the recorded version of the song.
Especially on this stuff, I think it was just like, play with me, with the guitar, let's find the groove, and then we did it pretty quickly. We didn't have a big budget down there. We didn't raise that much, so I think we were in and out, So that gave it a kind of immediacy, and the fact that there weren't that many overdubs and stuff like that. It was it gave it a character. Each, you know, so it's a bit of a ride. You know, that's, you know, and like I've said to you before, you're with any piece of work, with any album, you're looking just, I think, to create a spell for 45 minutes or however long the thing is, so that people have that listening experience which feels joined up, which feels like they're in that world for that time. And I think it's successful in that way. But if you start to look at the individual parts, it might not be as strong as some of the other albums, but as a piece,
well, this is it.
Together.
I'll come back to my journey now because, like I say, 5 or 6 listens through. So by about the 4th listen through, so I said there's a couple of songs that I've always thought, not that I dislike them, but just I don't think they're as strong as some of your other things.
Yeah.
And for the sake of it, let's name them. Sun is in the Sky, which I think is a fine song, but it's never been one of my favourites. And Shadow Boxing, which I think is a fine song, but again, never been one of my favourites. But this week, listening to them on sort of repeated play, I've just found that I've really sort of got into the rhythm of it and really gone along with it. And I found myself enjoying them far more this week than I ever have before. And I think that's a testament to what you were saying sort of just now, is kind of you and the band have gone to this place with this bunch of songs, found a groove with it. And I just, the sort of songwriting quality maybe across the 10 songs isn't at the same pitch, but actually the sort of recording quality across those same 10 songs brings that pitch up, so that I don't think actually there really is. So at the end of my journey is, I don't think there really is a weak spot. And actually, going back to what you were saying before about the lyrics as well, I've not really, I suppose, listened to the lyrics much on this. And like you say, actually, I think sometimes on this, you're singing about stuff more specifically or more directly than you probably have since you did in the 1980s when you were, you know, when you had Thatcher as a muse. So this might not necessarily be quite as specific as that, but I sense there's a lot more going on this album.
Yeah, I mean, Shadow Boxing, like, I think is one of my, I think it's one of the best lyrics I've ever written. So, you know, but I don't expect people to pick up on that particularly. The thing is, they're kind of, they're grooves. They're sort of the dun 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 dun. So that's where the thing comes from, and you know, that's what I'm trying to create. I'm not, you know, they're not narratives. So Sun is in the Sky, again, because it's got that kind of repetitive thing. It's just a kind of a mantra, and it gets more intense as it goes on. The lyrics often you just wash over people, and that's okay. But I do my best to make those lyrics mean something to me, so that the song means something to me. So because that helps, that's the other ingredient that makes the thing work, that makes it bubble and squeak and sort of flow. And so you know, it's well, although I'm saying that about the lyrics, I didn't really engage too much intellectually with this album. This is more from the gut. This is more like, let's just boogie. Let's just, you know, do that thing and see what that works. See how that sounds.
Well, I think, because I think when you're, especially with the lyrics, I think it depends on your mental space. And because obviously I've written lyrics myself, and I don't find that you can sit down and say, right, I want to write a song about this thing, or I want to write an album about that thing. But the lyrics always seems to come from a place of, well, whatever's going on in your head at the time, right? So I think even if you're sort of doing it unconsciously, you're reflecting something, right? And wherever you were when you were making this album, I think it seems something just a little bit more direct about it. Because we've talked before about the fact that lyrically you can sometimes be quite sort of ambiguous, so that the listener can take what they want from things. And I think here it's just that tiny bit less ambiguous. And I didn't really notice that till this week.
Yeah, I think they're quite personal. The lyrics, they're not about things, they're about emotions and about life situations. and often, well, some of them are. There's one or two which are, and also I think I sang them quite hard. I wasn't singing in a kind of soul pop thing. They were quite forceful and
yes,
dry.
You're right, actually, yeah.
So that they're pushing a bit harder. But then in the end, Lines of Charing Cross was I read that book, Peter Ackroyd, Biography of London, and I was fascinated with the subterranean catacombs of London and the underworld and what they had discovered when they were building the tubes in the Victorian times with the skeletons of, lions and tigers and elephants and all sorts of stuff, mammoths, underneath what is now Soho and Charing Cross. So I like that as a metaphor, because when I got to Soho in the sort of early 80s, very early 80s, in the analog world, I would walk around there looking for a break, going into someone's office in Denmark Street with my guitar, trying to get somebody to pay for a demo, trying to get a publishing. I'd read This Is What You Do, and so and I because I had read those biographies of all the guys that were kind of doing the same in the 50s and 60s, the ones that might have turned into your Bowies and Bolands and the Larry Parnes label and all the magic of Soho and just walking around in an analog age where you just need a stroke of luck, but you got to go. So that's what it was about. That, and at the same time they were knocking Denmark Street down to build these glass towers. So there's a facade of Denmark Street left, but what is really a cultural gem has been replaced by Mammon. So that's how it goes in Soho. So the song was about all that. In fact, they used it for soundtrack on the short film that they made about Denmark Street, which I was really honoured about, because that's what it was about. It was perfect for that. So there were things like that. There were songs which were about specific things, but the other thing, some of them like Shadow Boxing and stuff, were just about emotions. And because by then I'm sort of 4 or 5 years into not drinking anymore or not taking anything, things are coming through, things are coming up, awakening. So without wanting to get too kind of esoteric about it. So, and I wasn't editing myself lyrically. I thought, no, just let it go, just let it.
Yeah. Well, you could definitely hear you purging some stuff on some of the songs.
So well, the whole of my life has been a purge, one long purge. I mean, I think that's what songs are, because I'm not very good at. Songs have always, I'm better now than I used to be at kind of personal relationships and talking, but in the past, songs were my therapy.
Yeah.
Weirdly.
And now it's talking to me, right?
Well, no, you're going to need therapy after this. After standing there, like singing, not being able to talk on a one-to-one, but to stand on stage singing about what's going on in your subconscious to a lot of people is a kind of a weird thing to do.
Yeah.
I realise that.
But then again, do you ever get to the point, because this was something I found, is that you can write a thing, and once the thing is written, then you kind of, some part of you becomes slightly divorced from it. Did you ever get that, where you're on stage and it's like you're singing something that somebody else has written? Is that ever a thing that you sort of feel?
Yeah, very much so. I still get that now. I always say that I try to, when I'm playing live, get to the heart of what the song was about. But sometimes that's impossible. I can't remember exactly why I wrote Wicked Ways. And yet I still like playing it occasionally because, first of all, people like it. That's not the main reason, though. It's because also it's fun to play and I can connect with it. But I couldn't tell you anymore particularly what the lyric was about, where it came from, or what it means to me. That doesn't mean that I'm not giving it everything. It just means that I have a different relationship with it. Whereas some songs I can get inside straight away, Coming Your Grace or something like that. I'm in there straight away, I know.
Well, the thing about playing cover versions anyway is you play a cover version because you connect with it emotionally. So better yet, if you're essentially playing what feels like a cover version, except you wrote it yourself. So you're connecting with it twice in that event, aren't you?
I'm playing all my own cover versions these days. Because, Yeah. I mean, look, you see, this gets to the heart of the whole idea of authenticity, right? And I was fascinated when I watched the Springsteen documentary on Broadway, where he said, look, you know, I'm the guy that wrote about girls and cars and the freedom of the highway, but I live 10 miles from where I was born. You know, I don't know a thing about cars. This is the blue-collar hero, right, of America, Mr. Authenticity, admitting to people that that in its way is an act as well.
Yeah.
Like, as much as Liberace was an act. Really. So, you know, I've always struggled with this idea of people saying, keep it real. It's all an act in a sense when we get up on stage and do that thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but by the same token, I think for me, it's all storytelling. You write books, it's storytelling. You write songs, it's storytelling. You know, even if there's no narrative to speak of, you're still telling a story. You're still telling a story of somebody's soul and somebody's emotions. And I don't think it's the story itself that's important so much as the emotional connection that you're making. So like Springsteen can write songs about whatever, about being a soldier, and he's not a soldier. It doesn't matter as long as he's connecting emotionally with what he's singing about, right? And the same with you and all this stuff, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why the words don't necessarily have to make sense.
Yeah.
You know, I go back to you know, my great inspiration, Mark Bolan, Metal Guru. Is it you? Yeah. But to me, it's an absolute clarion call of wonderful kind of enlightened humanity. It's the most uplifting 3 minutes of my life when I was an 11-year-old or 9-year-old, and it still is when I hear it on the radio. And it doesn't need to mean anything, because whatever it is that he thought it meant elevated the whole thing into something very special. And so that's what you're trying to do all the time. So I can't really, you know, I can backward engineer this album, if not now when, and say, this song's about this, and this song's about that, and this is what I wanted to do, and this is what I wanted to do. And there's a certain truth in that. But the real truth is, I'm just trying to channel whatever it is that I'm going through in that moment as best I can to communicate. And that's the role of a musician. That's what I do. You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. You just hope that you can do it often enough for people to connect, and it's always a surprise what songs people connect with as well. To me, you know, because that's really alchemy, isn't it? It's magic. You can never predict that, and you certainly can't engineer it.
Well, and there's plenty of that here for sure. Look, I wanted to ask more about Lions of Charing Cross, but I'll come back to that. One of my favourites, I think my second favourite on this album, is the title track, If Not Now When. I think because I guess most of the other songs on this album, you've got that kind of rock and roll thing like you were talking about going on. I think there's something about, I don't know whether it's the choice of chords or... No, I tell you what, there's like a grammar, I suppose, of songwriting where there are kind of destinations that you're supposed to pick out, and there's kind of end points and punctuation points that come as part of the music. And I think If Not Now When, the title track, I think avoids a lot of the regular punctuation points, but kind of invents its own grammar instead, while at the same time doing something that sounds kind of fairly, not ordinary, but relatively straightforward. On the face of it, it's a relatively straightforward song, but actually bubbling under the surface, you seem to be doing lots of weird things that you kind of don't really expect as a listener. And I think listening to that song, I think your brain is always slightly on edge about what the song is doing, because it never feels quite like it's doing what you think it should be doing. And yet it's coming up with something else instead that's just like really interesting and keeps you absolutely glued to it. And now you're going to say to me, oh, we tossed that one off in 5 minutes.
I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Joe. Well, I'll tell you what.
It's that alchemy you mentioned, right?
Well, yeah, but also, I mean, technically, it drops a beat every bar, so it keeps you. It's not in 4/4 strictly. It's da 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 da, and it has that kind of thing, which is kind of unsettling. Keeps you on your feet. Keeps you on your toes. You're not quite sure. Is that a mistake? And then, oh no, they've done it again. Oh, that's how it goes. Okay. Oh, I quite like that. And then it's got these other bits. I mean, for me, it's the nearest I've ever come to, one of those kind of New York bands like Television or Richard Hell and the Voidoids or something like that. They always had these spiky, dry productions that, Talking Heads, I guess, very early Talking Heads, that were very sparse, but were quite clever, And I think there's something in that because, again, deliberately, no strings, no keyboards, no brass sections, no backing singers except for me. The whole album was stripped on that level. So I like that. I also like that one. Yeah, I'm glad you like that one.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. Well, and the other one, and, there are plenty on this album that I do like, but the other one that So, okay, the very first time I ever heard this song, I was already kind of aware of it, I think, by, I guess, sort of kind of osmosis reputation. Somehow I'd picked up on that this was supposed to be one of your better songs. So the first time I heard Lions of Charing Cross, I was kind of like, oh, that's a bit flat, actually. Is that really one of your best? But the weird thing about it is, as that song, it's not really flat at all, is it? But the first time you hear it, you're doing something slightly different with your vocal. I think you're singing in a register that you don't normally sing in. And so the first time you hear it, I think I was slightly put off by it and kind of slightly alienated by it. But then as it goes on, it draws you in, doesn't it? And I've got to say, the run off on that last sort of 3 minutes as it really slowly fades out and you're doing this sort of thing with your voice that sounds almost like you're singing a saxophone part yourself as a backing vocal on the runoff. I think that's the most glorious 3 minutes of your entire career almost. I'm not sure. Yeah, I absolutely fell in love with that song, despite the fact that for the first 2 minutes, the first time I heard it, I thought, oh no, that's a bit rubbish. It's weird, isn't it?
I think, yeah. I know what you mean. I mean, I think it's probably because we were on such a low budget, I decided to sing the brass section at the end rather than get one. And I think that's what I'm going to do in the future. But
it really works.
I think there's a nod to kind of that kind of 60s psychedelia, Mamas and the Papas, that kind of the way that they would do things with their vocals and then do it again, slightly delayed, and just it's just got those nice kind of sus chords where where they're suspended, and so the melody floats between, and I am singing it in a low register, so there's no grand entrance. I'm most proud of the fact that I got the word costermonger into the second verse. I bet there aren't many 80s sophistopop acts that can put costermonger in there, whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's a pay-on, as Mark would have said, to the whole Soho West End mod, I guess, aesthetic, in the sense that that golden mile of Berwick Street all the way to Denmark Street and the dreams and the analog world that I've talked about that existed there before. That's what it comes from, but it's also about ancient history in that book that I was reading. So yeah.
It's a song about ghosts, and when you get to that sort of 3 minute run off at the end,
that's a good line. Song about ghosts.
It is, and when you get to that 3 minute bit at the end, where there's no longer any lyrics as such, but there's still a vocal, and the vocal, like you say, you've got, and this is perfect because you've got the sort of ba 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 ba, but in the background, like you say, you've layered another voice going ba 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 ba. And it sounds like you've actually conjured the ghosts up. Because you can hear all these things that you can't quite hear. It's like spirits in the song.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. That's Yeah, that's probably, like in 20 years' time, if somebody's ever bothering to sort of analyze our work or listen to our albums, it'll be like the way I listen to Van Morrison now or something, or Neil Young. And I go, oh, there were periods where Van was making crap albums, but there's always one. There's always a track on there, or two, that make you go, fuck. And even now, that's still true. Neil Young is the same. Dylan even now is the same. One or two tracks. I mean, what can you expect after all this? And so I think that's the same of, you could say the same of, some of Paul Weller's 90s or early 2000 albums. There's one or two on there which go, wow. And there's always one or two. So if not now, when? There's one or two. That might stick. That might stick and live with, say, some of the best stuff we've done. So that's okay.
Oh, I definitely think there are. I don't think there's any question of that. And the fact that OK Have It Your Way is still a regular in the live set as well. I mean, just goes to show.
That one, I like that one because that was like an answer song to "It Doesn't Have to Be This Way" lyrically. Okay.
Yeah, it is. I didn't notice that.
Here we are all these years later. And you've had your capitalist wet dream. So how's it going? Where are we at now? Is there more equality? Are people happier? Are they more peaceful? Are things working better? Have we got a more stable society? None of that is true. This is what happens. This is now we're living in the end result of I'm not saying I told you so, but a lot of people say Reagan, Thatcher, deregulise everything, believe in the survival of the fittest, no thing is society, the market will decide. You can chuck all those cliches at it. Okay, have it your way. That's what that was.
Well, we're in the
midst
big,
of
yeah.
But what's quite encouraging is that common human decency can still win the day.
Yeah.
Thank fuck for football. I mean, come on, there are Marcus Rashford, Gary Lineker, and the way that they all supported him as well when he stuck his head above the parapet and defeated Gary Lineker, won BBC nil. He defeated them, and also with public. They're doing this to dismantle the social fabric. They don't fundamentally believe in public service broadcasting or the health service or any of the things. So let's destroy them from the inside. I mean, that could be a cynic's view anyway. So it's interesting to see the reaction. So that song was a kind of answer to that, and I quite like the lyrics to that one. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh well, it's got that great couplet, and I'm terrible for remembering things specifically, so I'm going to look it up because this often gets mentioned. But it's such a great couplet, and the value of nothing and the price of everything, which of course is just the way you phrase it and the way you sing it. I mean, it's a fairly clear statement, but it just you can't listen to that song without coming away with that, can you?
Well, that's it. That's.
But what about All That Glitters? Is that a song about Michelle? It sounds like it is. But I mean, it's not
about me. It's about me. It's about
really? Right.
The idea that I mean, like a lot of songs, they will come from something that she says, which stop me in my tracks and make me think, even though at the time I will deny it. Oh, shit, that's right. The idea, all this searching for immortality through fame or riches or achievements is really a waste of time and a busted flush, because what really matters is the connection that I have when I sit down with my dogs and look into and play with them and look at them and think, this is really what matters, this feeling right now. I mean, it's taken me a long time. Although I took a good fight when I was younger, there was part of me that was definitely determined to get on top of the pops, determined to become famous, determined to be, and very competitive with it, and that's okay. I think sometimes that stood me in good stead. I came from you know, a family where my father he was a tough guy. He was a boxer in the RAF. My mum was also very streetwise. So I had a kind of, you know, I had that competitive thing, but all those values were skew with. And I think as you kind of get older, especially as you have your own kids, and as life progresses and friends start to die, and you start to look at the clock and think, well, we're in Sniper's Alley now. So what really matters? What's really important? And of course, that's a very simple metaphor. The glitters isn't gold, but within the lyric, it's quite hard hitting about me. And
yes.
And that isn't to say that I still don't have my moments. You can't get on stage. You can't do what I do without having a certain ego, without having a certain part of you. And that I enjoy that. I'm not ashamed of that. But it's putting it in the right place. It's putting
it context,
putting it where it belongs. Because we've all seen, and we live in a world now. If you'd have told me in the 80s that George Michael, Prince, David Bowie, they'll all be dead. And Bowie, unfortunate because of what he was an incredibly clever man who I think saw through all this. I don't think George Michael and Prince did. I think they were caught in that thing to a degree. Incredibly, Prince, a genius. I mean, I've been watching footage of him recently, live footage that's appeared on the thing, and you think, my God, probably the best live performer there's ever been. I never saw him, but when I see this, but you wonder, was he able ever to find peace away from that spotlight? Because that spotlight and that desire, and it's not just fame and music. It could be about accumulation of money or achievements.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, all those things are not what we're put on this earth to do. You know, we're living in a small little era of industrialization and capitalism, where we think this is normal, but what we're doing is against our own nature a lot of the time, which is why we have this pandemic of mental health and stuff, because how did this happen suddenly? How come we're suddenly slaves to our phones and all this, which is only increasing the whole comparison culture and all that stuff. So it's really that's kind of where, that's the emotion behind all the glitters. And okay, have it your way. They're the base emotions which stir up some form of lyric. You know, doesn't say that I don't have the answer, but I definitely got a lot more questions than I used to have.
I think asking the question sometimes is the answer, isn't it?
Well, we don't, we can't all be Eckhart Tolle.
No, but as long as you're asking, as long as you're not just accepting, as long as you're asking, then you're a proactive member of your environment.
You're alive.
You're involved in it. Yeah.
You're alive.
Yeah.
Alive. You've got empathy, compassion, all those things which sound like, that's the social glue. We're social animals. We need each other. Altruism ultimately is a survival technique.
Back in the 1980s, she tried to turn those things into dirty words, didn't she? Empathy, compassion.
Mm. Yeah, I don't blame her solely. I think her foot soldiers have taken it a lot further. I actually, I don't think she would have been. I think she probably would have been appalled by somebody like Suella Braverman.
Yeah, agreed.
To be honest, so that's how far we've come.
There's a kind of weird not survivor's guilt, but something aligned to survivor's guilt going on with Suella Braverman too, I think, because basically she's from a family of immigrants herself. And it almost seems to be like, get in quick and shut the door behind you almost. Seems to be part of her philosophy. It's horrifying. Really horrifying.
I think there are a few like that who have taken that path. You know, yeah, you know, but it's quite heartening what happened in this last week or so, actually.
Yeah, it shows that the human spirit is there.
Yeah, Lineker ain't no great left wing kind of, you know, but he's a human being who kind of hit the sweet spot about what most decent human beings feel for other human beings who are suffering.
Yeah.
That's all. Not to abstract. That's what he was saying. Don't abstract them like so that they become the other, so that we don't feel their pain.
Well, see, this is the weird thing. They're like, people will say, oh, 42% of them are Albanians and they're only coming over here because they're looking for a job. And apart from the fact that I'm like, well, is that the worst thing in the world anyway? Is that really such a terrible, terrible thing? I'm like, well, if 42% of them are coming over here because they're just looking for a job, doesn't that mean that 58% of them aren't just Albanians coming over here looking for a job? So you don't ditch the 58% just because you want to do something about the 42%. You throw that £500 million you've given to France into actually sorting it out over here. But no, that's not how this will work, is it?
No, well, of course. And also, you know, it's not as if there's plenty of work, as we all know. There was a shortage. So it's all coming to a head anyway. So this is what, because fundamentally, I've always thought that Tory philosophy was against human nature. That was always my feeling about it. It wasn't even particularly ideological.
No,
and you know, and that's why I'm encouraged by when I hear my kids' generation talking. They're not maybe as ideological as we were back in the 80s about left and right, but there's a greater understanding. I think, you know, the generation that voted for Brexit, the generation that voted for the Tories, and they are by and large an older generation who are going to be replaced by a more enlightened generation. And so when people say, "Oh God, it's terrible," I find hope there. I do.
Do you know what? Because you know I'm a postman, and yes. Every now and again I'll be delivering to an area that's largely sort of student population, and you knock on the door if you've got a package or something, and half the time the person who answers the door, and it takes you a minute to register, is that male? Is that female? And actually, do you know what's really lovely about that? Who cares? Who cares? This is the future. It's people who aren't sort of stuck in thrall to the sort of traditions and laws that we've written down for ourselves, because as each new generation comes along, they're going to be different from the generation that went before, and there's going to be progression and there's going to be evolution, and it's dinosaurs like the people in the Tory party at the moment trying to go backwards. Basically, all they're doing is grinding gears and making a lot of noise. And I'm a great believer in the sort of philosophy of late stage capitalism, by which I mean that there's a reason why this is happening. And eventually, as a species and as a society, we'll get through it and we will be better on the other side. But we're just going through a really, really ugly phase at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, you know, there's never been such a divide, and the people that are running the global corporations are greedier than ever, and more powerful than ever, because they now have access to everybody through their phone.
Right, yeah.
Disinformation, blah, blah, blah. And this has happened overnight, you know, like a blink of an eye in the last 10, 20 years. So it's very interesting times. But like, I agree with you, the younger generation are inspiring, you know, and I think there is an awakening there about all sorts of emotions and the way you want to live your life and who you want to be, which in the end you can't stop that, because it's you cannot stop it. It will be. Conservatism is all about conserving the old ways.
Yeah,
that's not going to happen. So yeah, I do have faith.
Well, this conversation definitely went off on a bit of a tangent. So let's bring it right back down to earth.
All right.
And let's make a suggestion about next time.
Next time?
Well, next time, I don't know if anybody who's watching is going to be able to see this. Well, I made that myself, clearly, because this didn't come out on CD. So maybe that'll be something to talk about as well. It's Flits and Bones.
Flits and Bones. All right.
Dr. Robert's solo album.
Yeah.
And then we'll dig back into the Blow Monkeys after that. But yeah, that's a real change of pace, I think.
Yes.
And so, yeah, something to talk about for a change of pace next time.
Lovely. Look forward to it.
Right. Until then, I'll see you later. Thank you. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Cheers, Joe.
Bye-bye.